Are you ready to dance with me?
I'm not much of a dancer.
I'll give it a try.
I don't like this song.
Come on.
Guess we'll give it a shot.
Hello, big dude. Come on.
Okay.
Who's there? Come on out here.
What are you doing over there?
I'm just
I'm
dancing.
just having
Just
fun.
dancing.
Did you dance? You look like a good dancer.
I can't dance. We dance together. Come on.
Dance for us.
Oh, I'm not dancing.
No way. Not me.
Oh, not me.
You look silly not dancing. This is a dancing place.
Okay. I'll do it.
Stop it.
I am the caster.
This is a place of love.
I am the LEC now.
We were dancing and happy and everything fell apart. LEC doesn't like that. We like happy games. We don't like people running it down.
Welcome back to the LEC studio. We are ready to dance both on and off the rift. I can't keep this up. Welcome to the studio. I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to keep dancing, but the teams, they're going to return after an exciting week one we've calmed down. The action will start with Rogue versus Vitality, who are looking to continue their success from the first games. I'm here with Daniel Drakos and with Vedius. Vedius, you weren't in the cold open, but I assume that you also enjoyed it.
I mean, we've all made our fair share of content on the broadcast. I'm going to say that sits among the top of content that we've made.
I think we had to hold Vedi back. Vedi would have come in it would have been too much for the people. They're not prepared for the version that includes Vedius, I think.
Man.
I don't think so either. But now let's turn our attention towards the teams, because we've already seen some surprises here in the LEC summer. And if you missed them, here are the main headlines. Look at the top of the standings. 2 undefeated teams, 3-0 for Fnatic and for Rogue. Fnatic with their strongest start to a split in a while.
And I think some people may be surprised, but of course we did have our Super Week to kick off the split, and we're going to be having another one at the end, so a lot of exciting games still to come.
And of course, after a questionable first game from Fnatic, we got a wonderful Blitzcrank montage that you're now seeing on your screen from our boy Hylissang. A miracle steal to secure their first win, and after that, smooth sailing for Fnatic. Always good to see them show up and play so dominantly, and honestly, Rogue as well, surprising me with a 3-0 start too.
I think Fnatic showcased that they're still top dogs, and I think that while their game versus Misfits was a little shaky, I think we're seeing some very clean League of Legends from this team overall. I like the drafting, I like what we're seeing, and I think the Reckless and Selfmade in particular have really come off to a very strong start to the split.
Yeah, they've been absolutely on point. Reckless shared in PGL. It was really a slap in the face, that 3-0 or 0-3, I should say. No,
In the finals?
Yes,
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
finals
Getting
against
swept
G2.
like
He's
that?
getting
Ooh.
swept, and he said that really woke us up, and we're taking this very, very seriously. And the proof is in the pudding. Now, G2 and Origen stand below those first places, and both had a bit of a hot and cold start to the split.
Yeah, I think that when we look at both teams, expectations were quite high. We all talked about them still being top 3 teams here in the LEC, and to kick off the split with a 1-2 record, I think was very surprising and honestly underwhelming for many fans and spectators.
And especially if you're watching G2 in their first game, where they absolutely dominated Mad Lions. They showed us the power of the Varus, especially when paired with that Zoe. And then to see them come into this game versus OG that you're seeing highlights from now, where they, quite frankly, just made a ton of individual errors that are so uncharacteristic, rounding out that week with a, once again, very terrible loss to Vitality on the side of G2 stunned me, honestly.
And I think that when we look at both these teams, sure, we're not going to be hypercritical of them after the very first week. It's not unsurprising to drop games, but I think that with the level of individual performance we saw from some of the players and some of the teams, I was quite surprised with what we did see from G2.
Yeah, we may not also forget that G2 barely scrimmed, of course, the week before, so we're hoping now that they're back to a regular scrim schedule, we'll see some different performances. No time to despair yet. Sjokz, however, thought, okay, this isn't that great. 0-3 to start off the first week. They had that big losing streak in spring, and now Dylan Falco immediately stepped in and said, hey, Neon and Dreams, you are starting in the bot lane versus G2.
Yeah, and having spoken to Dylan, he talks a lot about how right now he feels that all the pieces are there. It's just about finding the right pieces that fit together. And after the first week, we saw some nerves. I think we saw a lot of hesitation from the Sjokz squad. And I think the hope is that by introducing some changes into the bot lane, we'll see a different Sjokz and see if this combination is the best to enable them for success.
Yeah, because making these kind of swaps in the middle of a summer season with so much pressure on you, it's a very difficult time to be doing it. You would have wanted to figure this stuff out in spring, but obviously Sjokz had their fair share of difficulties. So if you are a Sjokz fan, you're just hoping that they find the strongest version of this lineup as quickly as possible.
We'll see what happens today for them. Now, SK and Vitality, they had a phenomenal start. These were two of the lowest placed teams coming out of spring, and they racked up some fantastic wins to start things off. And it looked like they had control of the fundamentals, and especially for a Vitality with new players, that is very impressive. Oh, same for SK with Zazi in the mid lane.
I think that what's very exciting about some of our rookies that we're seeing is that they're bringing a fantastic baseline into the league. And a lot of the things that we're seeing right now, I think, is stuff you would have to teach rookies in the past, but the fact that in week 1 we're already seeing it increases the base level of competition. So I'm really excited to see the growth that both SK and Vitality can make this play.
Yeah, normally when we talk about rookies, it's, hey, they're very good mechanically, but now not only are we seeing strong mechanical rookies, we're seeing rookies with very, very good fundamentals. Credit to the ERLs for consistently leveling up and showing us, honestly, just this level of new talent.
And what is great to see is that in a new segment in week 2, you might think, oh, we'll talk about, the Fnatics and the G2s of this world, but the fact that we had so many hopeful performances from teams we didn't necessarily expect it from, and a lot of teams are starting off strong, makes me super hyped about the playoff race and that race for Worlds.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you can see the excitement on Vitality's faces after beating G2. Beating G2, even if G2 was underperforming, getting a win like that means a lot to these teams. Same for SK, taking down a team like Origen means a lot, not just in the context of doing it, but also in the context of the standing and that race for Worlds.
Yeah.
So a lot on the line, only week 1. I can't wait to get into week 2 already.
Great moments last week and great moments coming up this week. Now, Fnatic, they are looking at one of the strongest teams in the LEC right now. And tomorrow, they face off against Origen in our match of the week.
The game is getting faster, is getting scarier. It is about balancing on the knife's edge and being willing to put yourself in the firing line.
Here comes Xerxes.
And now looking for a wraparound.
The showstopper delivers to Origen's waiting arms, and the Zumi is bye-bye. Teleport is absolutely questionable, but Little will go in. Oh, Hillisang with the goal! That was such a good rocket grab.
He just knocked it out of his hands.
The individual players on teams like G2 and Fnatic force everybody on the enemy team to make constant decisions all the time. And when they have a lapse of judgment and they decide to join for a team fight, win the team fight, that lapse in judgment of after the team fight, what do we do now? In that moment, we've already decided.
Now the fight really begins because there's the double kill coming out. Hillisang's going to take an inhibitor tower though.
the thing about Fnatic, the way to beat them is to just purely play discipline. You need to play the map smart against these players or they will punish you. So I think it's just having a strategic mind and knowing where you need to do to get the win.
So Origen's like, okay, we have to commit to this split push now. FLICKR lands.
Hylissang, you have to go down here. Upset takes the kill, and Hylissang was just a little bit too greedy, a little bit too deep.
I just don't feel like they have that guy in Origen that calls for that unorthodox or a bit more risky play. And why so many times they just end up in a situation where nothing is happening, they're waiting for the right moment, but a team like ourselves just give very few right moments.
Nuke Dunk already almost down, he gets caught out, and now Upset's the next target, they're just dead. Origen can't do anything about this, they just get swept off the map. Fnatic able to take 3, only lose 1, and now can push in for an inhibitor.
Their strength can also be their weakness, and they can tend to play too aggressive, and it can definitely also backfire.
Look at the flank. A lot of damage. Sleepy Trouble Bubble gets missed. Gold card is Prime. Gets thrown out. The slam dunk could stop.
Origen is constantly playing second fiddle. They seem to be missing that key something that allows them to bridge the gap.
We have been improving, and hopefully it will take us far.
Fnatic will top the table, undefeated.
Welcome to the conversation.
100% Fnatic.
They have done it.
Seen OG put their foot on the gas pedal, and now we just never, ever want them to stop it.
Even though we were hot and cold on Origen in week 1, they did manage to beat G2 Esports. They are welcomed into the conversation, but can they do the same and beat Fnatic tomorrow?
Look, I think it's an absolutely massive challenge for Origen, but if they want to show us that week 1 was just a fluke, what better way to end your week 2 than by beating Fnatic? That would be incredible. Because think about it, Vedius. We could have a middle-of-the-pack Origen stuck in the battle for, 6th place with 2 wins against Fnatic and G2. Summer Split's a banger.
Yeah, precisely. And I have my eyes on Origen specifically because I want to see this team really challenge for the throne. I'm kind of tired of them constantly playing in this 3rd place spot where they're never going to beat a Fnatic or G2. And I think that tomorrow's game could be a great indication of how far they've come over the last year.
In the same vein, Fnatic 3-0, but you could argue, well, their strength of schedule wasn't the craziest. They are playing Origen and Mad Lions this week. Sure. So we're certainly going to know a bit more about Fnatic after this weekend. Now, the teams, they will also be tested by a new patch. So, Ender, tell us a bit about 10.12.
Thanks, Sjokz. Well, 10.12 brought changes to elemental terrain, runes, summoner spells, and of course, champions. But for the purpose of this segment, I want to really focus in on the changes to the runes and the rift. Let's start out with the terrain changes. Now on Infernal Rift, more blast cones are going to be spawning. I don't see this making any meaningful difference to the meta in pro play, but we might see some more fun outplays this weekend. Or teammates completely trolling each other. On Cloud Rift, Scryer's Bloom will spawn in the river near top and bot lane, as well as outside the base gates. The speed zones now grant nearly twice as much movement speed when out of combat. These changes enable teams to scout the enemy jungle without risk before pushing in to place their own wards. But because of their location, they are most accessible to side laners. Add on the fact that you can now rotate from a side lane faster, and you can lessen the impact of a TP disadvantage and collapse to the rest of your team sooner. TLDR, Cloud Rift is now Split Push Rift. Now for runes, the big changes were to Guardian and Predator. Guardian lost its movement speed to improve general usability and shielding power. Now after looking at data from solo queue, it seems to be an overall buff and a good option for supports. It's important to note, however, that the movement speed was highly valued by pro players who seem not to view the changes as positively. I think the rune is a fine choice, but most meta support champions still prefer Aftershock or Aerie. The big change, however, came to Predator. At the price of losing damage and overall duration, Predator's cooldown was reduced, and the effect now gives movement speed while moving towards enemy champions, including those out of vision. That is huge! Predator has always notified champions that you're coming, but now you can use it cleverly to see if you're about to get counter-ganked, and that can be a big deal. So expect to see this rune around on the usual suspects of Gragas and Skarner, but keep your eyes peeled for other champions who benefit from it. I think a lot of tanks can use this rune very well and could be run on Trundle this weekend. Now let's talk about changes to Ghost. Its move speed now activates instantly instead of having a brief wind-up time. This makes it so much more appealing to low mobility mids. For this reason, I would not be surprised if Victor saw some play this weekend who got complementary buffs on top of those Ghost changes. There were a lot of changes this patch, but I don't really see them shaking up our LEC meta picks too much, although I do think we may see some existing picks gravitate towards Predator, Guardian, or Ghost. There are a lot of nuances specifically around elemental rifts that I'll be diving into later today on the cast, so that's it for me, and back to you, Sjokz.
Thank you so much, Ender. There's a lot to go over, and we've also seen some changes, most notably nerfs to some champions we saw last week here in the LEC, Varus and Trundle. How much is that going to influence their pick and ban priority?
When I look at these champions, I think the changes are relatively small. Varus being the bigger of the two. The additional move speed from Trundle will hurt, but I don't think it takes him out of S tier. Varus, on the other hand, getting the scaling nerfs, I don't think it immediately... Varus will still be a top tier pick. The question is, does someone else now contest him now that he's had a little bit of that power from the Q removed?
Yeah, I think that it won't influence the meta much, very similar to what Drakos is saying. My eyes are very much on Volibear.
Ooh.
This big bear has received some big buffs, and he has been flexed between the top lane and the jungle. So I'm excited to see if teams will bring it out, what they'll bring it out into, because I think that the champion can be quite strong on the current patch.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Alfari on his stream was smacking kids around with that Volibear, so we'll see if it gets picked. Furthermore, these are a lot of changes, right? In the first week, there was a new patch. Now, again, a new patch, which has some interesting changes. I mean, the teams are going to have to be on their toes if they want to keep up with everything.
I mean, completely, because we're also seeing teams continue to evolve how they're drafting. Mad Lions, the Team Vedius that you've talked to me a lot about, just praising them for the way that they're drafting, the way that they're continuing to break a very shortly established meta. So it feels like we haven't even really settled down yet. We don't know for sure what the next evolution is of the LEC meta.
But one champion that's staying exactly the same is the weapon of 200 years worth of experience, Aphelios. And on the latest episode of Euphoria, Drakos shared his thoughts on LEC's most recent Aphelios 1v9.
Here's my take on it, right? I think that there are two things in this clip that are stupid, and it's Death Dance and Rogue. Aphelios is not the problem in this clip, and if we can roll it now, Depa, so let's just roll. So if you're not watching on YouTube land, this is a good time to turn into YouTube land. But a bunch of stuff happens in this clip. And if you haven't watched it on half speed yet, I recommend going through and watching it on half speed because I've watched it repeatedly. First off, for those who don't know, the white gun, the chakrams, are Aphelios' arguably most powerful tool, hands down in terms of individual 1v1. Now, he's fully stacked on chakrams, which essentially means not only can he crit normally, he's got a guaranteed extra crit on top of that from chakram damage. On top of that, the closer you stand to Aphelios when he has chakram out, the faster his attack speed is. So what essentially happens here is Finn misses his barrel.
Can we roll the clip again, Depa?
Well, we can just roll the clip and maybe just ad nauseum in the background.
Yeah.
So what you're going to watch here is 20 chakrams, Death Dance as well. So Finn misses the first barrel, which denies the armor penetration. That would have been big. That would have been enough to kill NX. Similarly, he then walks into melee range. This is a big int move because what happens when you're in melee range of Aphelios in this stage, when he has 20 chakrams, he's doing essentially 4 times damage because you've essentially doubled his attack speed. And on top of that, because he has 20 chakrams, you doubled his damage output. So he is just shredding through everyone. The things that Rogue could have done here to make this better. At the stop, they could have not let their mid laner die. Great. They could have also just played it slower because he has Runeans and he's in a creep wave too. So he is max healing off literally every single thing possible. If Finn hits the barrel, that guy dies. If
they should have just waited until the EQ was up from Jarvan, hit it, and then layered everything on top of it.
They walked into melee range of Ultra Instinct Goku, and then they wondered why they died. This is the only time this champion is this powerful. People wouldn't say the same thing if they're like, oh, you walked into Darius with his passive fully stacked? You're an idiot. Why would you do that? But because it's an AD carry, people are like, oh my god, it's so unbelievably powerful. How could this work? Now, if you've not watched Dragon Ball Z and you're like, Drakos, how the hell am I supposed to know that Ultra Instinct is stronger than Super Saiyan Blue Goku, which is stronger than Super Saiyan long-ass gold-haired Super Saiyan 3 Goku, which is 7. And that's fine. I get it. If you're a casual player and you don't want to do the background reading to understand when this character is strong, I get that. But these are pro players, and they literally just ran into this guy when he's at his most powerful. If you just fed into it any juggernaut in the game, you get a similar result. Like, no one would ask this question if it was Darius. They'd be like, why did you walk into Darius when he had his ult reset up and he had his Noxian friggin' passive? Like, that's so dumb. But that's what people sound like when they complain about this character.
Oh, well, if that's not reason enough for you to listen to and watch Euphoria, if you haven't yet, I think it is. Drakos, how do you come up with the references? How do you explain it so clearly so we all understand, except for me, because I have no idea.
You've never watched Dragon Ball Z. Well, I would like to give a shout out to my boy Vedius here, who encouraged me to watch Dragon Ball Super.
I mean,
that's a shameless promotion right there.
I mean, let's make it easy. Let's compare him to Sasuke.
Right.
I mean, like
Chidori.
So,
he's got the black light.
And in any case, you did sound a bit like an Aphelios apologist.
Yes.
Which, in this instance, I think you make very fair points, which is that there are windows in which you can play around Aphelios. But I think Drakos and I are both in agreement that, like, visual clarity, the strength of the champion, the versatility, where it feels like there's no easy point in the game that you can punish him, like, if his only weakness is you have to kill him in one shot or you die, like, then sure, maybe the champion is a little too strong.
Yeah, and this is kind of the thing. I think the clarity is the biggest issue for casual play. If you're just coming into League of Legends, you're not familiar with the champion, I think it feels really unfair to play against. But in Pro, it just feels like there's too much versatility without there being really a cost. Gravitum is so good at setting up ganks, but it doesn't do less damage. Infernum is great at AoE. It does more damage. There's no cost for that AoE. The only thing that's supposed to hold him back is that these guns are situationally available, but when you're a pro player and you're smart about managing that ammo resource, it never feels like a real cost. And that is kind of the big issue with the champ.
So it's complicated, but at the level these pro players are playing, they should know it anyway. So in the hands of them, it just looks incredibly overpowered and is quite overpowered.
I mean, but also for just people who put the time and effort into understanding Aphelios, like, that's kind of the problem, where, like, if you were to pick something like Annie, I think Annie is very straightforward in how her power level works and how she works, and she's not difficult to understand. But Aphelios, because of how complex he is, it's not inherently obvious where a lot of his strength comes from. So you have to, like, do background reading in order to be able to understand this champion. While also trying to understand.
In order to appreciate the movie, you have to read the books, because they really left a lot out. You know? The remake just isn't the same.
That's it. That's how you get a hold of Aphelios and know exactly how to play him, like you saw right there. Well, we'll be on the lookout for some more Aphelios plays tonight. The LEC continues with week 2. Well, we looked at this before, and I said, well, after week 1, I don't know what to expect, because I feel like anyone could still beat anyone, but usually that does stabilize a bit after a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think that in week 2, I wouldn't be surprised to see more upsets. It would not surprise me if Mad Lions beat Fnatic. It wouldn't surprise me if Sjokz beat G2 as they have done multiple times before.
What? I was gonna say, that one's a little more bold, but I'm generally on the same page.
It was Sjokz that ruined G2's undefeated streak. I'm just saying that, like, in early weeks is where we often see many of the expected top teams struggle, because they're still finding their form, understanding the meta, and getting back into the flow. So I expect many surprising games, which is why everyone should tune into every single one of them, because you never know what's going to happen.
And you never know what's going to happen in between on the analyst desk. So hey, Fnatic versus Mad Lions, our 5th game, also super exciting, but our first game is just minutes away as surprise team Vitality look to end Rogue's winning streak.
Trying to get on towards them. Corner of the Portugal comes out with Cabashard, and Melitza are just ripping through the backline. It's not even about comp anymore. It's about Melitza and Cabashard working as a duo.
Rock is getting very hyped all the way up from last split, I think, when they ended on such a high note. I think they have a very specific game style as well, where they commit very hard on the side lane. I think they are one of the teams that plays the least around bot.
Vitality has potential, for sure. They have some hungry rookies, they have some good players. I think they need to find a way to play that everyone's on the same page.
And thank you, Duke, for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, you had an amazing week 1. I think we can all agree on that. But do you think it influenced the prep you had coming into week 2?
Not really. No, we already knew what we had to work on, even if no matter the results of week 1, and it just influenced a bit our motivation and our confidence. It's always better for us to not start 0-8 at least, like last split. So yeah, it was just more of a relief than anything.
It's a plus for sure. But I want to know, what are the most noticeable changes you noticed between the spring split lineup and the new batch of player you have coming into summer?
I would say that there is more direction in this summer lineup. I think they are more prone to make a plan in the early game, especially the mid game, where in the spring split we were really falling short. Also, there is more, I would say, energy in general, more team spirit, which is really good when you come into on stage into an official game, because this is where I would say everything gets hard, especially emotionally, and I think this team is more ready for those kind of matches.
And that's what we saw last week. And talking to Shanky during the Beko interview, he told me that he was in charge of managing personalities of the players. So is there a new approach you guys have when it comes to managing rookies this split?
I mean, a bit, because Shanky was not working with us, so I think he's also having a closer relationship with some players that he also knows that since a long time, I would say. We added Shanky, but in general, I think it's more the whole coaching environment that changed, and even the working environment that changed a lot this split. So for the better, I think.
For the better, indeed, at least so far. And today you'll have another challenge facing off against Rogue, which is also a team that surprised most of us last week through their results. So do you think what we saw from Rogue is something we can base ourselves on coming into this week, and how do you expect they'll come against your lineup today?
I think as much as we had one pretty good game against G2 last week, we still have a long way to go before reaching our full potential. Rogue should be a really hard match. Rogue are a really good team, really solid players, and it should be a hard match, but I think everything is possible if we have the draft we want, if we have an early game that is going well. I think we can definitely challenge them in the mid game. But yeah, I think Rogue are very solid at the moment and will be a tough opponent.
Yeah, it's going to be an explosive matchup, I hope. Thank you very much, Duke, for your insights, and good luck for today.
Thank you.
And back to you, Sjokz.
Always great to hear from Duke, and we'll be seeing Vitality play in just a little bit. And before we get there, I wanted to take some time to talk more about Vitality and what impressed me from their Week 1 performance. When they played against G2, many fans looked at them and said, hey, G2 struggled, G2 didn't play that well, while Vitality played solid. But I think that takes away from some of the great things that Vitality actually did. And I wanted to showcase a very cool macro decision that they made when playing against G2 Esports in Week 1. So we have this play, and we have this situation where G2 is trying to set up a dive onto this bot tower. So when we have a look at the minimap, you'll notice that the Galio sitting in the mid lane, he has his teleport available. He can move towards the bot side of the map. He can also use his ultimate as well. On top of that, the Lee Sin in the bot side is making his way down towards the bot side of the Rift too. So you've got a number of people making their way towards the bot side, and in particular, this wave in the middle lane is starting to stack. So you'll notice here with Perks and Mickey, they have this big minion wave that's making its way towards the tower. In the context of the comp, Vitality knows that they want to try and get this duo ahead as quickly as possible. And G2's like, okay, if we can set up this dive, deny them farm, maybe even get some kills, this is great for us. Of course, Vitality recognize that this dive is potentially happening. So what do? They set up for NG, not with that circle, but with the circle slightly above over here, as NG is preparing to try and make a counterplay happen in the bot side of the map. So, as we roll out the clip, you're going to notice that NG actually decides to go back to base. And some of you might be thinking, well, why is he going back to base? Because I thought the same thing. This didn't really make a huge amount of sense. And what I think is very cool is what Vitality choose to do next. So as G2 is setting up for the dive, I'm going to very briefly pause it here. You'll notice that in the mid lane, the Galio is looking to TP back towards base. On top of that, the Lee Sin is already making his way towards the bot side of the map. So things are going in G2's favor. They're like, okay, we're getting ready for the dive. This huge wave is stacking and ready to dive onto this tower. And so Vitality, for some reason, have disengaged, and they're sending Gragas up towards top lane. And you're like, okay, this doesn't really make a huge amount of sense. What exactly is Vitality's plan here? Well, Vitality's plan is to send Sion back to base. Sion is going to reset, and it's going to look to TP down towards the bot side of the map to counteract this play while NG is picking up farm on top. So why is this so clever? Well, the reason why is because Vitality are now going to send their duo bot up towards the top side of the map, where they can then look to secure the Rift Herald. Notice that the Drake has already been taken. There's no objective on the bot side of the map for them to go for. They can't win that 2 versus 4, given that the Galio has already invested the TP mid. So overall, what Vitality is getting is they're getting this farm up towards the top side of the map because it's not being wasted going into NG. Malitza's going to push in a whole wave and gain a CS and level advantage over Galio, who's now lost his TP. And they're going to send their bot lane up towards the top side of the map to then rotate towards this Rift Herald, which they'll then use to force a fight around mid lane. Meanwhile, Sion is in bot, collecting all this farm and can't be dived because it's Sion. Then min-maxing in the situation they were put in to get the most out of the situation and come out on top. And I think that's just really impressive to see from a bunch of rookies and a new team that literally just came into the LEC. So I wanted to give huge props to Vitality because honestly, I thought that it was some really good League of Legends, especially against a team like G2 Esports.
And honestly, Vedius, the television screen there, putting up a bigger fight than G2 did with some of those extra circles. But I want to double down on what you're saying. I think you're so incredibly right. And one of the really cool things about that play to me is the way they acknowledge champion restrictions in the play. They TP Sion bot lane. Sion Q is instantly going to clear the wave. Yeah. And that wouldn't be possible if that was a bot lane with more CC. If there was a Thresh there that could land a hook, it's only possible because he recognizes there's no immediate form of CC to deny this wave clear, and hence there is no potential for G2 to try to force the dive on the Sion. It's big brain. I'm very impressed.
It's big brain. It looks like they have the fundamentals down, and as we also mentioned last week, they're not, just relying on one player popping off or whatnot. I also really appreciate you breaking that down, because those are some of the things we often miss when we're watching live. So really appreciate that deep dive analysis. So Vitality now already have the same amount of wins as they did in spring. That's great. Now they're up versus Rogue. Now Rogue is undefeated, and to me it did seem like we had a bit of a different Rogue on our hands last week, but I can't put my finger on it, Vedius. Can you?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to decisiveness. It feels like that they are way more well, decisive is the word to use. I don't want to use it again, but it's the best word to describe them, in that whenever a play came about, they just did it. There was no hesitation. There was no dancing around. The way in which they executed and the decisions that they made were good. And I think one of the big problems they had from last split was when it came to things like Baron, when it came to pushing their advantage. Sometimes they would wait a little too long. Sometimes they weren't sure on how to properly execute. But now we're seeing these massive confidence plays that are slightly riskier, but due to some great execution, they're able to pull off like you're seeing on your screen right now.
And I think the control and the consistency that we see from Rogue early to mid game is what makes them so strong against some of these weaker teams. And then now you pair that with this newfound Han Sama aggression
and Vander.
And Vander as well. The man still has not died. Incredibly impressive performance in week 1. We're getting a completely new flavor of Rogue here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And when you look at it, it's not that they're extremely flashy in those early games, right? But they get the advantages through neutral objectives, through playing the map correctly, and then systematically build out those leads. And I feel like this bot lane is really developing into the X factor they need, because if you've got all those basics and those fundamentals completely down, and then you have those pop-off players, then you're cooking with gas.
I mean, it's funny that we put so much focus on the bot lane because we are seeing a big shift, I feel, from last split to this split, but Larsen's still smurfing like it was last split. Larsen was the guy that was, when things went wrong for Rogue, he was solo carrying fights in the last game. And now we get to see him on top of, like, he landed a 4-man shockwave. And on top of that, his bot lane is popping off, and his jungle is way more active on the map, and then you've got Finn on the top lane just being like, okay, I'll just do my job, and like it all comes together. So while I do think that Rogue did have an easier week 1 relative to some of their competition, this is how you want to start. You want to kick off the split with good understanding of how to move around the map, good individual performances, because you're setting yourself up for success. The question is, can they keep it up as the split progresses?
And as much as I love the top side of the map, and I think you're good to point them out, Vedius, I also have to just double down on the praise for Han Sama and Vander, because these are two very established players. Vander as well. So to see such a drastic, I would say, identity shift for both these guys, where they are, I think, contributing both so much more for this team overall is fantastic. To see such veteran and senior players on a team suddenly look like new players on the stage in front of us is incredible to watch.
It's so cool that we have two looks. We have a Vitality who's completely reconfigured and started fantastically in week 1 with the fundamentals. Now we see a Rogue where you can clearly see the development that they laid down in spring just being continued throughout summer, and they look very convincing so far. We're going to have to see if Vitality can stop Rogue in their tracks as we're kicking off week 2 of LEC Summer.